as we thought that was a very simple set of halakhot, and suddenly it becomes very complex, and we'll have to learn more about it today, what we're doing right, what we might not be doing right, and what we can start telling people that they're doing wrong. That's the most important. Okay, so last time we ended off that how you wash your hands. We mentioned that you have to go right and then left, right and then left, right and left. We mentioned that you should not transfer from the right hand, from the left hand to the right hand. You should take the cup in your right hand, pass it over to your left hand, wash it, put it back down, and then go back. Remember, we said with the bread, you wash 3 times on the right, 3 times with the left in the morning, and then when you come out of the bathroom, even though we didn't mention it, that goes in turns. So you go right, left, right, left, right, left 3 times. Okay, so that's kind of how we ended off. We also ended off saying that you have to say the blessing. I don't know if we talked about it specifically, but you should make sure that you're saying the blessing of Netillat Yadayim specifically when the hands are wet. Okay, and so today we're going to talk about that part of the process. So even though we're saying that the process of washing the hands, usually you wash your hands and then you dry them, right? Over here we're washing the hands, we're saying the blessing, and then only after we dry them. There's a lot of poskim that say if you wash your hands and then you dried them, well, now you're in a problem. Now you can't. There's a lot of poskim that say you can't make the blessing now. So even though you technically did the mitzvah of washing your hands, you lost out on the blessing. Nonetheless, so we have to make sure that, don't think that drying the hands is a bad part. No, drying the hands is the end of the process of washing the hands. So you have to go ahead and dry your hands as the end of the end of washing the hands. Why did the sages want us to dry the hands? Rashi explains from the Gemara, from the Talmud, that if your hands are wet, it's kind of disgusting. You're going to touch now bread, you're now going to touch food, and it's not going to be so appealing since it gets moist, it gets wet. No one really likes that. So that means even if someone washed their hands with a revi'it, even a lot of water, nonetheless we say that you should go ahead, dry your hands, and that should be the process before you go ahead and eat your food. Of course, you want to make say you wash your hands, you say the blessing, then you dry them, and then you go ahead and make the blessing on the food that you're going to eat. Now, what happens, especially nowadays, what's the minhag makom and what's the custom in all of these public spaces? We have to save the environment. So what are we doing? We're not giving out paper towels anymore, right? Because chas v'shalom, we don't want the environment to get ruined from our paper towels. And so what did they do? They invented these hot air drying machines, which don't really do anything. They just kind of splatter the water a little bit, and then they keep your hands completely wet. Now, let's say in a perfect world where these devices actually worked and they completely dried off your hands, or at least 99% of the way they dried off your hands. Is that considered good for drying? So the answer is that yes, that would be good, that would be permissible. And one who went ahead and used one of these machines to dry off their hands, that would be considered drying. And at that point, if you didn't say the blessing, you would not be able to continue to say the blessing. So we want to make sure that you say the blessing before that, and then you would dry it that way. The problem most of the time is that these hand drying machines are in a bathroom. And we know we can't say a blessing in a bathroom, as we mentioned last week, with regards to the airplane. So that, let's say you're on an airplane and you want to go wash your hands. So even though you're going to go to the toilet to wash your hands, because that's the only place that you can wash your hands, nonetheless, you should not say the blessing in the toilet. You should, in the bathroom, you should go outside and then say the blessing. So I guess maybe it's not so practical if it's in a bathroom setting, but maybe you're going to install one in your house after being, but then you can't use it on Shabbat. So, you win some, you lose some here. But what about drying the hands, I guess, in Sukkot, or right now, if I decide if I'm going to go wash my hands, I'm going to put my hands outside for 2.5 seconds. It will get completely dry. It's faster than using a air drying machine, and it's you can use it on Shabbat. Does that count as drying your hands? Again, we're going to say yes. The only problem that that is going to be an issue with drying the hands is using your garments to dry your hands. So again, become common custom that people kind of dry their hands on their garments, on their pants, on their shirt. Now this is not great. Okay, the sages say that if someone does this, it'll negatively affect their memory, and it'll bring upon a person forgetfulness. So a person should go ahead and not wipe their hands on their clothes. I guess our parents were right when we were kids to tell us not to wipe our hands, even though they thought it was because of laundry, but now we know that it's actually because it can cause forgetfulness. Yeah.
Do you mean before you do the blessing, or just like?
And in general, yeah. So this is in general. You should never dry your hands on your clothes, okay? Or wipe your hands on your clothes, okay? So we're saying specifically now because a lot of people do it, and so if they don't have a towel, or they use their hands, they dried it really quickly, and then what happens is still there's a little bit of wetness on their hands, so they go, they dry it off really quickly, and they're in a rush to get to their sandwich because the sandwich is really yummy, and so what happens? They say no, that's not good. You might come to forgetfulness. Nonetheless, if someone did it, it's still fine, it's still proper, you've done it in the right manner, but we're saying that you should not go ahead and do it. There are questions in the halakha. What happens if I go to someone else and start wiping it on their clothes? Is it going to affect them, or is it going to affect me? So over there's a question. There's no real answer. So I advise not to go ahead and do it because it might affect you. Okay? Or both. Or both. So don't go ahead and dry your hands on someone else's garments, and more so, don't dry your hands on your garments. Now, up until now, we've mentioned that Netillat Yadayim is done primarily, and we know it primarily for bread, right? As everyone knows, on Shabbat and on holidays when we eat challah, that the first thing we do after we do kiddush is we go ahead and wash our hands. But the Gemara, the Talmud, actually brings that there's another time that we have to wash our hands in a similar method, except this time we'll see that it's without a blessing. So the Gemara talks about Rabbi Elazar, that he said in the name of Rabbi Oshaya, that any food that is dipped into a beverage requires Netillat Yadayim. So that means any time you have a food that is wet, okay, then it would necessitate Netillat Yadayim. Now, there's two famous Pirushim on the Gemara. You have Rashi, right? Rashi is one of the main commentators on the Gemara, as well as the rest of the Tanakh, and he says that when they were explaining this, it means that someone needs to wash their hands just like they do with bread, with a blessing. Okay, but the Tosfot, which is the grandson of Rashi, is Tosfot, one of the Balei Tosfot, and so he says no. We need to wash our hands, but we don't do it with a blessing. Okay? And he says that the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim for eating moistened food, for eating food that has been gotten wet, is more of a technical measure because we want to avoid the drops of the beverage from becoming contaminated with tuma. And since it could be ingested, all of this, so he brings his own explanation, but he says it's only a technical measure, but it's not the ikar, it's not the main reason for the takanat of Netilat Yadayim. Therefore, we have to go ahead and wash, but without a blessing. Okay? And that's the main two opinions. As we'll see in the next couple of halakhot, that we do hold, and any time that you see that there's a machloket, and we've mentioned this a little bit, that there's a rule called safek brachot la'akel, that in a place of a doubt, when in doubt, don't bless it out. Okay? So when in doubt, do not say the blessing. Do not say, we say safek brachot la'akel, and therefore we say, do not say the blessing. In this case, when we have two big commentaries, we have Rashi and we have Tosfot, and one of them is saying bless, one of them is saying don't bless. In this case, we take the lenient road of not blessing because we don't want to accidentally or say a blessing in vain. Now, how serious is washing the hands? We mentioned how it was very serious washing the hands before bread. We mentioned that last week. Some of the issues, some of the punishments that can come upon a person if they don't wash their hands before eating bread. But the Matei Yosef, he says the same thing that we said about bread, that someone who does not perform Netilat Yadayim, he'll become, he's belittling the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim, that he's going to become excommunicated and he'll be uprooted from this world. So in that sense, it's the same kind of stricture when it comes to Netillat Yadayim for these moistened foods, for these foods that become wet. And so there should be no difference. Now, Rav Ovadia Yosef said, okay, calm down, right? It's not as strict as the Tosfot also understood it, that when we're saying that with regards to this ruling of Netillat Yadayim with regards to the moistened food that become wet, it's not on the same stricture as the bread, and that's why we don't say a blessing. So he says there is room to say that you won't get excommunicated if you're not so strict with it, but nonetheless we do have to be careful with that. We do have to make sure that we are washing our hands, as we'll see now, with regards to foods that have become wet. There was a question here about what about washing hands when exiting a cemetery. So there's a custom that we wash our hands just like we do when we come out of the bathroom, when we exit a cemetery, for the same kind of reason as what we do when we leave the bathroom. Just as we leave the bathroom, even if someone goes to the bathroom, and we'll talk more about those halakhot, even if someone goes to the bathroom and doesn't necessarily use the bathroom, he would still have to wash his hands. Of course, he wouldn't say a blessing, and there's no asher yatzar, there's no blessing after using the bathroom because he didn't actually use the bathroom. And the main reason for that is because of the harmful forces that are in the bathroom and the harmful forces that are in the cemetery. And for those reasons, we wash our hands when we leave either the bathroom or the cemetery, even if we haven't used the bathroom. Okay, and then how much more so if you actually use the bathroom would you have to go ahead and and wash your hands? Next question was over here, was what kind of wet foods? Okay, so now we're going to talk about that now. What the vegetables and all of that. Okay, very good. So you guys are on the right track, and that's going to give me the segue into what types of foods are we needing to wash our hands for. So the halakha is any food that has become moistened, has become wet through a beverage, needs a Netillat Yadayim. Now there's going to be some caveats to this, but for the grant's sake, anything that is being dipped, anything that has been washed, anything that has been had water on it, or is still wet in that sense, right? Anything that is still wet would need to have Netillat Yadayim done beforehand. Of course, we're not talking about in a bread settings because you already did the Netillat Yadayim on bread. If you're having on Shabbat, for example, let's say you're eating a meal and you happen to dip some vegetables into salt water, then over there you're fine, you're good to go. But if it's not in a meal setting, in the sense that you've washed your hands for bread, then you would need to perform Netillat Yadayim. Of course, we do it again without saying the blessing because of Safek Brachot La'akel, as we mentioned, the machlok between Rashi and Tosfot. So it's the same procedure as we do for bread. And so all of the strictures, as we'll see later on today, B'ezrat Hashem, that with regards to things that interpose between the skin and the water, the amount, the type of water, the vessel that needs to be used, all of those are going to be the same. And so in that situation, you want to make sure that you wash your hands, again, without a blessing. So we need to make sure that even if someone's, for example, and then we'll bring more examples in a second, but even if someone's, for example, going to eat grapes, and they wash the grapes, right? Since the grapes are already wet, and you have to go ahead and you have to wash your hands before you eat those grapes, again, without a blessing. If someone is going to a cemetery, they should make sure to wash their hands. They don't have to do it immediately after, but it's best to do it immediately after. You just have to make sure that you wash your hands after. Usually, all the Jewish cemeteries, most of them at least, have a washing station outside. Okay, going back to the food, right? So if the food became dry, so let's say you washed those grapes and they were left out, and you let them get dry. So in that situation, you're good to go, and as long as they're dry now, you don't have to wash your hands. Or just saying at the moment that you're eating them, they are moist, they are wet.
So let's say you wash an apple.
Yeah.
So you'd have to wash your hands right after
Correct.
washing the apple. Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Because when you're washing the apple, you might be washing it with soap and water, but again, you have to do it. So even though you're washing an apple, right, and now it's wet, so you have to go ahead and you'd have to do like you would do for bread, 3 times on the right and 3 times on the left.
That's
Okay.
before you eat it. So
That's
if
before you
it's
eating it.
dry, you wouldn't have to do
If you left it out to
Yeah.
dry, then you're good to go. Yes. Okay. If you put it outside in the sun, all right, then you're good to go. Now, what happens if the food, we're going to get into some of the specifics now, okay? If the food is always eaten with a utensil and it's never eaten with one hand, okay, then there's no reason to suspect that a person would go ahead and touch it and need to wash his hands. So what's one of these examples? For example, cereal, right? I have not seen anyone, even my son, who likes to eat everything with his hands, he doesn't eat cereal with his hands, okay? And so in that situation where you know 100% that, and it's not only just you, the whole world doesn't eat cereal with their hands. So in that scenario, even though it's a food that's being moistened with some beverage, nonetheless we say that everyone eats it with a spoon. And therefore, you would not have to go ahead and wash your hands for that. Similarly, soup, right? Soup, again, no one's really eating soup with their hands. And so in this situation, you would not need to wash your hands before eating soup, a vegetable soup, or I guess mainly vegetable soup, right? And so in that situation, since majority of the people are eating it with a spoon or a fork, I guess, and therefore there's no reason to need to perform Netillat Yadayim before that. Okay.
I have a question, because like we eat a lot of tuna, so tuna's in water normally, right?
Okay.
So then you dip a chip in the tuna and eat it. Would you have to wash before that?
So when we're saying so
Like canned tuna, like canned tuna.
again, do people eat tuna with their hands? Nowadays,
Yeah, but you're dipping a chip into it,
you're dipping a chip into the tuna.
or something,
So over there, we're gonna see that there's a difference. Okay.
Okay.
So we'll talk about, I guess, that in a second. Okay. Fine. So if you're using a utensil and you always use a utensil, then you're good to go. You don't have to go ahead and wash your hands. And the rule is the same if someone wishes to wrap their hands in a cloth or wear gloves while eating the food. That just like as we said with bread, that one will still have to perform Netillat Yadayim. So even if, for example, someone has these grapes and he says, no, I'm going to wear gloves. No, you would still have to perform Netillat Yadayim before eating the grapes. Again, just as we said for bread, that as long as it's less than a kazait, then you can go ahead and you don't have to wash your hands. So if you're eating less than 30 grams of whatever it is, let's say I'm going to eat 1 grape. Okay, really, we're going to see in later in the Brachot, in the halakhot Brachot, you should not eat 1 grape. You should not eat 2 grapes. Okay, there's a problem with eating 1 grape, that you put yourself into a question if you have to now do a after blessing. That's another discussion, and B'ezrat Hashem we'll talk about that later on. But let's say someone's rebellious and he's going to eat 1 grape. Okay, even if it's even if it's moistened, even if it's wet, nonetheless we're going to say he does not have to wash his hands because it's less than a kazait. Just like what we said with bread, if someone wants to eat bread less than a kazait, he does not have to. If he wants to be follow all of the opinions, all of the strict opinions, and does it and washes his hands, he will be blessed by heaven. Okay, if a cooked food is still moist with the liquid that it was cooked in, so for example, French fries, right? Sometimes if French fries are very oily, right, it would be necessary to wash your hands before eating them. Again, it depends how oily the chips are. If you're air frying them, then you have no problem, right? The problem would mostly be if you're some of these very oily chips, oily French fries, right? And this also applies to pickled food. So, for example, if you have pickled olives, right, or pickles, right, that they're sometimes sitting in their brine, then you would have to go ahead and wash your hands for Netillat Yadayim, 3 on the right and 3 on the left, before you want to go ahead and eat those, as long as you're planning to eat more than a kazait. Okay, it comes out that there are 3 issues with coming to wash your hands for foods that have touched beverages, and the 3 things are: A, if one eats without touching the side that has been moistened, has been wet; B, if one plans to eat less than a kazait; and see if the beverage has been cooked. Okay, so if one of these conditions have been met, you still have to go ahead and wash your hands. Okay, but if two of these have been met, then we say you're lenient and you don't have to go ahead and wash your hands. Okay, now I'll go ahead and start giving some examples so it can be more practical to us and so we can start to understand. So if a person, for example, takes a cookie, an Oreo cookie, and he dips it into milk, okay? The blessing for French fries is boré pri adama. It's the grammar, okay? Just so boré pri adama, yeah? So for example, if someone takes his Oreo cookie and dips it into milk, or as probably more practical is when someone takes a piece of cake and dips it into his coffee, or back then when the old grandmas would have the little biscuits and they would dip it into the tea. In all of these situations, right, you're not going to touch the liquid itself, and you're usually not touching the moistened end. You're not touching the wet end, right? And also the beverage has been cooked. Okay, maybe not the case for milk. Pasteurization is a little different than cooking, but at least for the coffee and for the tea, over there, you would say that he's not touching the moistened end, and it's also a cooked beverage. In that scenario, you would not have to perform Netillat Yadayim, and this is the case even if he eats more than a kazait of the food. So because you have two of those conditions, you have the condition that it's a cooked beverage, and that he's going to be touching only the side that hasn't been moistened. In that situation, he does not have to go ahead and wash his hands. That means if either the beverage was not cooked, or he was going to touch the side that became moistened, then he would have to go ahead and wash his hands. And so I guess in the way, for hot beverages like coffee and tea, you're not going to wet your hands. But I guess if someone's dipping their Oreo, and sometimes they dip all the way in to make sure the whole Oreo, in that situation, you wouldn't need to go ahead and wash your hands. You have questions? Okay. So you'd have to go ahead and wash your hands. Okay. I guess also cookies and milk, right? Sometimes people dip the whole cookie into the milk, then you would have to wash your hands. Yeah.
Well, is it still boré pri adama, or does it change?
No. It doesn't change. The blessing is still the same. So for the cookies, it would be mezonot. For the French fries, it would be adama. The blessing itself doesn't change. The whole issue is, do I have to go ahead and wash my hands beforehand? Okay, and of course we wash our hands without a blessing in these situations, and also 3 on the right and 3 on the left to cover that basis. Okay. If someone plans to eat less-than-kazait, as we mentioned earlier, that if you eat less-than-kazait and he wishes to dip it into a cooked beverage, right? So he wants the cookie. This time I guess he's gonna put the whole Oreo cookie, but it's with those mini Oreo cookies, right? So he's only doing one mini Oreo cookie, so it's not a cooked beverage, and also it's less-than-kazait. So over there we say, okay, he's fine to go ahead without washing his hands. But I think generally one Oreo I think is usually kazait, or around kazait maybe. So you have to be careful with that.
So since you're washing the hands without a blessing,
Mm-hmm.
like, because normally it's like if in doubt, don't, right?
Yeah.
With a blessing, could you just wash your hands since you're doing it without a blessing if you're in doubt in this situation?
Yeah. You can always. You're 100% right. Yeah.
Okay.
If someone wants to, they can always go ahead and wash their hands. There's no issue with that. We're just saying when you need to wash your hands.
Right.
Okay. And so we're giving you the minimum of the requirements. Okay. If someone wants to go ahead and wash their hands before they eat everything, go ahead, be my guest, right? You might get chapped hands after a while. I remember there was one guy in my synagogue that he's starting to learn all of these halakhot, and one day he got mad. He started yelling at the rabbi. I said, "Rabbi, I don't get it." He said, "What? What don't you understand?" I also don't understand. So you can try to ask me, but I don't know if I know the answer. He says, "Rabbi, every 5 seconds they're telling me to have to wash my hands. When I wake up in the morning, go wash your hands. When I go to the bathroom, go wash your hands. If I want to eat bread, go wash my hands. If I want to eat grapes with water, go wash your hands." I don't understand. How much water did they have back then that they were washing their hands every 5 seconds? And so the rabbi was just like, "What are you going to do?" that's part of the religion. Okay. If we're eating, okay, that's good answer. That's a good question, right? So a salad, right? So a salad, a lot of the times, most of the times, you're eating with a dressing, right? Either olive oil or some kind of mayonnaise base or whatever. It's going to be some kind of liquid that's our beverage that's been placed on this salad. So again, since the majority of the world does not eat salad with their hands, and they usually eat it with a fork, we can be lenient with regards to a salad and say that we do not have to go ahead and wash Netillat Yadayim for the salad. Usually the main issue over here with these halakhot is foods that one is going to be touching with his hands. So if he goes ahead, and again, we're talking about most of the world, not just him, not just this one situation, because even if maybe he doesn't, or maybe in this situation he doesn't, but it could be in other situations, or maybe he'll change his mind during that eating that he wants to touch with his hands. Therefore, we say, if it's the custom of the world not to eat that beverage or that food with your hands, we use a utensil, a fork or a spoon, then you don't have to go ahead and wash your hands. So with a salad, with cereal, soups, these things that you're never going to use your hands to eat them, then you don't have to go ahead and wash your hands. So with pickled food, for example, pickles, right? If you want to go ahead and use a utensil, you would still have to wash your hands, because even though you and in that situation are going to be using a fork, it might be that another person, or maybe even you, during that session, it falls off the fork and you use your hand accidentally. So we're worried that you might accidentally come to touch it, and therefore you should go ahead and wash your hands in that situation. Okay. If you guys have any more examples, please ask away, because I'm not going to remember. I know all of these different examples.
What about like watermelon or something that's already moist? Right?
So we hold the juice of a fruit that's not constituted as a beverage.
Okay.
That's constituted as it's more of its juice. So in that situation, you don't have to worry. It's specifically when it's been introduced to a new beverage. Okay, the liquid itself is considered part of the fruit, and so you don't have to worry about that. It's a good question. If someone wishes to eat less-than-kazait of food that's dipped into a beverage without touching the moistened part, at that point you've got all of those things, and for sure you do not have to do Netillat Yadayim. Again, those three things are: it has to be, if you're eating less-than-kazait, less than 30 grams, if the beverage is cooked, and if you're planning not to touch the moistened end of that article, of that food. Okay, and again, a lot of the times we're not dipping, but nonetheless we do see that there are times that we have to specifically dip. For example, on Pesach night, we take the karpas, we take the vegetable, and we dip it into the salt water. And so what do we do before that? We wash our hands with 3 times on the right and 3 times on the left. And actually some of the sages say, why do we do that specifically on Pesach? Because on Pesach everyone's there, and finally you can introduce this halakha. Be like, hey guys, we have a halakha that the whole year round you're supposed to be washing your hands every time you're dipping a vegetable that's been in water, or any type of vegetable that has come into contact with water. So over there you would say that you would need to wash your hands. Again, with the fruit salad, I don't know how many people eat fruit salad with their hands. So over there you can also be lenient. But if for whatever reason you have some kind of fruit that has come into contact with it, then you would need to, again, any fruit that would come into contact with any of these beverages would need a Netillat Yadayim, if again you're going to be touching it with your hands. So a fruit salad, again, most people usually use a spoon or a fork. So I would say that in that situation you would not need to wash your hands. Dry cereal you do not need to wash for. Again, since it's dry. And even if it's in a bowl, we don't need to wash our hands. The only issue is if you would add milk to it, and then even then we see that there's no issue, because a person's not going to be using their hands to eat cereal with milk. Some poskim rule that if someone performed Netillat Yadayim to eat bread, right? So he washed his hands, and immediately after doing Birkat Hamazon, he wishes to eat one of these foods, right? So you generally, what does a person do? He washes his hands. He eats, for example, Friday night, right? We wash our hands. We do hamotzi lechem min haaretz. We eat the bread, and then we go throughout the night. we're eating, drinking, having fun, and then we do Birkat Hamazon, and some people have the custom that after Birkat Hamazon they do the dessert in order to increase the amount of blessings that they can get, because we know that we have an obligation to do 100 blessings a day, and on Shabbat it's a little harder since the Amidah, the Shmona Esrei, isn't 18 blessings, 19 blessings, really it's only 7. So you lose out on a lot of those blessings. How do you make up those blessings? So eating more, specifically eating dessert, okay? And so you want to make sure that some people have the custom of doing the dessert specifically after Birkat Hamazon, so that way they can get even more blessings. Now, some poskim say that what happens if you ate these grapes, right? Grapes that were wet with water, after you did the Birkat Hamazon, meaning the whole time you were in the meal, your hands were supposedly clean. You did wash your hands before. You did Birkat Hamazon. So now, really, there's no issue on the surface. There's no issue with regards to your hands. Your hands should be clean for all intents and purposes. But nonetheless, there are posting that say you're fine. You're right. There's been nothing to come into contact with your hands to make it, let's say, not washed. So you're good to go. Other poskim disagree. Other commentators say, other halachic authorities say no. There's still an issue, because once you ended the Seudah, once you ended with Birkat Hamazon, you wrapped up that meal, and now you go on to the regular world. So you would have to go ahead and redo Netillat Yadayim if you want to go ahead and eat from those grapes. Nonetheless, we say that if you want to hold like the lenient opinion and not wash your hands, you're good to go there. But one should try to be stringent in this manner, since he did end with the Birkat Hamazon. Okay? So what are these beverages, right? So we said the seven beverages are the main beverages that are the ones that will come into contact when any of these foods cause it to become to become susceptible to tuma, and therefore you would need to do Netillat Yadayim if you want to eat them. So what are those 7 beverages? These are the 7. Anytime the Talmud or the Torah talks about beverages, it talks about 7 beverages, namely wine, bee honey, olive oil, milk, dew, blood, and of course water. So all of those are 7 beverages, and if they come into contact with any food, it makes it susceptible to tumah, makes it susceptible to contamination. And with regards to our sense, it makes one liable to wash their hands. So those are going to be the main ones. And so you would have to pay attention to that. So I know the one that usually gets the eyebrow raise is blood, right? And so blood is listed among the 7 beverages. What does it refer to? It refers to someone who must eat sometimes food dipped in animal blood for treatment of some sort of the dangerous illness. It's usually forbidden. It's not allowed to eat blood of any animals, whether fowl, whether birds or actual animals. Nonetheless, the blood of fish and locusts are actually kosher, and it's permitted as long as there is some kind of siman, some kind of recognition that it belongs to a fish. So back then they would drink fish blood. I guess it was good for the body. It was very healthy. And in order to drink it, you would have to put some kind of like fish scales in the thing, so it was recognizable that it's from a fish. Don't worry, our food isn't any better. Okay, we laugh about it, but the fish blood was probably healthier than most of the things that we eat nowadays. So they're the ones laughing at us. Okay.
Oreos.
So why was it kosher?
The blood is only not kosher of animals and birds. So when the Torah talks about the blood of not being kosher, it's specifically about birds and animals. The blood of fish and locusts is allowed, and so there was the only issue with it is that someone might see you drinking it and think that it's blood of animals or of birds. Therefore, you have to have some kind of recognizable sign within them. So if you have fish scales in it, then people are like, oh yeah, that's from fish.
Could you just label it fish play? Without labels, sprinkling skills.
So that's a good question nowadays. Also with regards to, for example, it's a whole different sugi or a whole different thing. But let's say, for example, someone's going to a burger joint and he gets a milkshake, a kosher burger joint, right? Nowadays, kosher burger joints do have milkshakes. Why? Because it's all almond oil, almond milk, and it's all of these parv non-dairy substitutes. So a person can come to or you can get a cheeseburger, right? A kosher cheeseburger because it's fake cheese, or it could be a fake burger and real cheese, right? So nowadays there's all these different combinations, but if someone's looking from the outside, they're going to be like, "What is this guy doing? He's not kosher. He's not Jewish. Like he's eating milk and meat. How can he do that, right?" But nowadays everyone kind of has that kind of recognition, understanding that if he's in this kosher joint, or even if he's a Jewish person, we give them the benefit of the doubt, and we say that most likely that it's probably parv, it's probably fish, right? But again, so if you have on that labeled, right? So some people say that instead of having it in like a regular cup, it should have like a almond milkshake label or something like that. So that way a person would know, or on the menu, right? Say dairy free or something like that. So you would have to make some kind of recognition. Nonetheless, nowadays, even some of the halachic authorities say even if there isn't any, you can still rely on eating it in a dairy or meat place, because everyone's going to recognize and realize that today it's completely different. Okay. What about dipping food into yogurt? Okay, yogurt or leben. Okay, so the same would apply in those situations. So if someone was to dip, the crackers. Oh yeah, we didn't talk about the crackers. So what was the question about the crackers? The question was with regards to the crackers in tuna, or the crackers in yeah. So very similar, right? So if we're talking about tuna, and the tuna, not necessarily tuna, it would be the water that's the tuna mixed into, right? So then the question is, is he going to eat less? Are you eating less than a kazait? Right? Are you eating less than 30 grams? Probably not. Usually eat a lot more. 2, is the water cooked? Probably not. Right? Usually it's not, unless you cook the tuna. I don't know. At that point, there's not going to be any water. At that point, you already have those 2 gone. So the only thing that it has is you're probably not going to be touching the wet part, which I don't know. Maybe when you're going in and you're digging deep into, I don't know how deep you're digging into the tuna, but it could be that you're going to touch the sign. So in those situations, you would probably want to go ahead and wash your hands to make sure that you're covering your corners. So that's what that. If you're going to have like something like salsa or guac, in those situations, those are not considered beverages. So you would not have to go ahead and wash your hands. But if you're going to do it into yogurt or leben, right? Yogurt and leben, you would have to wash your hands. Yes.
So when you wash your hands, when you're, would that require benching afterward?
No. So the benching afterwards is only for bread. Okay, and so. It gets complicated because you're saying like, this is the procedure that I do for eating bread. Why am I doing it now? Do I have to do a hamotzi also on it? No, right? So the hamotzi is only on the bread, and then the birkat hamazon, the benching, is only going to be after eating the bread. Okay? All of these situations, the blessing is the same. The after blessing is the same as it would normally be. So if it's a cookie, it would be mezonot, and the after blessing would be the 3-faceted blessing, the main shalosh. If it's the 7 species of fruit, grapes, right, then ha'etz, and then also the men shalosh. The only difference is going to be the washing of the hands, and we just wash our hands without a blessing. Okay. What about if someone dips, again, crackers or cookies into butter or cream cheese? Okay. Do those necessitate washing of the hands? In this case, don't worry. Those do not need to wash the hands. So you do have I don't know, people really eat cookies with cream cheese, but I guess more so crackers with cream cheese, right? Or crackers with butter. In those situations, we do not classify those things. Even though they're milk-based products, they are not considered in a liquid state. There is though.
But what if the butter's melted?
Then it might be a problem. You're right. Right. So if the butter is melted, then you don't go ahead and dip. If you do, you need to go wash your hands. Yeah. Um, what about yogurt with granola? All right. So some people usually have yogurt with granola. So again, that's kind of similar to cereal. No one's really eating the granola with their hands at that point. They're using a spoon. So if someone's eating matzah with cream cheese and all of this, if you're a Sephardi, in Sephardi we say mezonot, you would not need to go wash your hands because mezonot for Sephardis all year long is like a cracker. For the Ashkenazim, they would have to go ahead and wash their hands because for that, it's like, for all intents and purposes, for the Ashkenazim, it's like bread, and they would have to go wash their hands with a blessing in that situation. Food dipped in salt, or salt. I guess that's not considered. Salt isn't considered a liquid, so you don't have to worry about that. It is not necessary to perform Netillat Yadayim, even on one hand, in order to drink a beverage. So up until now, we've been talking about food dipped in beverages, but the beverage itself, if someone wants to drink, he does not need to go ahead and wash their hands. Usually, a person does not touch the liquid. Okay. The Mishnah Berurah, he cited the Aruch HaShulchan, Rav Zalman, saying that if one wants to lick honey from his hand, sometimes you pour like tea and you pour some honey into your tea, and you get some honey on your fingers. What happens then, right? Do you say that's considered, because we said bee's honey is considered a beverage? Does he need to wash his hands? So he said in order to wash to lick this honey off his hands, he would need to wash his hands. But the Pri Megadim ruled that it's not necessary. The halakha burah, which is Rav David Yosef, the chief rabbi of Israel right now, the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, he recommended that you should perform Netillat Yadayim whenever planning to eat foods with one finger. So even if you're going to go ahead and lick the honey off of your fingers, then you should probably go ahead and wash your hands beforehand. Maybe wash your hands before putting the honey into the tea. And if you're not going to, then probably wash it off. Don't try to lick it, just so you're covering your bases. So just to clarify what I said earlier about the meat and the milk, right? So if it's kosher, meaning that to say that it's a meat dish with a non-dairy milkshake, there is no problem nowadays to go ahead and eat that. Or in the opposite case, where it is like a fake meat, right? And then you have cheese, real cheese on it. In those situations nowadays, since everything is fake, right? So even the real meat that we eat is really fake. So therefore, there's no issue with that. There is a minhag that we give the little children at the third birthday when we give them, the boys, the haircut, that they lick honey off paper, usually in the form of letters. In that situation, we do not necessitate the washing of the hands because paper isn't a beverage. Maybe you wouldn't make them need to wash their hands anyway because you don't know what the children touched. But in any way, they're not liable, and for any of these halakhot, they're still young. But if it was an adult doing it, I don't think, unless he's going to again touch the honey with his hands, he would not need to. If you're going to say that he's going to touch it with his hands, then there would be a problem. He would need to wash his hands. Netillat Yadayim. What about barbecued meat juices? Sometimes you got off the barbecue. It's moist. Some people just go right in, or let's say chicken wings, right? It's still moist, relatively moist. So in that situation, it's kind of like what we mentioned with regards to the fruits, right? That it's its own fruits, its own juices, and therefore you do not need to perform Netillat Yadayim with regard to those objects, those foods. If someone, for whatever purpose, wanted to eat meat or chicken with his hands, that were wet. He wetted the chicken, or he wetted the meat, or he wetted the tuna, right? And then he's going to eat it with his hands. Then he would need to perform Netillat Yadayim. If someone was eating his tuna, right, he washed his hands beforehand, and he was getting really into it, and then he said, wait a second, it's Suda Shlishit, it's the third meal. I should at least try to go ahead and eat it with some bread, okay? So if he wants to go ahead and he decided to eat bread afterwards, he already performed Netillat Yadayim at the beginning. Now he's going to go ahead and perform Netillat Yadayim again. He should do it in order to eat the bread, but without reciting a blessing. Because in this situation, his hands were not defiled. But if he wants to go ahead and defile his hands purposefully, as we'll talk about later on, he can either touch his shoes, he can scratch his hair, he can touch a covered part of his body. This would necessitate a blessing again. I think we talked about that also last week. Okay, so those are the halakhot with regards to washing the hands in a non-conventional state. Yes.
One more question.
Mm-hmm.
Chips and crackers and stuff count as like with your hands, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, because you're going to be eating the chips, right? So the chips are considered a food, and if you're dipping it into a beverage, then you would need to go ahead and wash your hands. Okay. So that I'll pause right now for a second for any questions. If you're just pouring honey into tea, you would not need to wash your hands. The only problem would be is if some of that honey gets onto your hands and then you try to lick it off. That would be the issue over there. Any other questions before we move on?
Yes, one quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding mixed nuts, typically you would put them in your hand, don't use a spoon or anything, that you're required to wash your hands or besides the prayer.
So if you're eating dry nuts, that's fine. You do not need to perform Netillat Yadayim. Okay, so with regards to Netillat Yadayim, we make a Netillat Yadayim with a blessing in the morning, and then any time you want to go ahead and eat bread, you would have to go ahead and make Netillat Yadayim with a blessing. In all of these cases that we talked about up until now, with any food that has become moistened, has become wet with a beverage, in those situations you do not make a blessing on the Netillat Yadayim. So the only times you would make a blessing on the Netillat Yadayim is first thing in the morning, and also anytime you're about to have a bread meal. So last week we mentioned, someone asked the question about what type of vessel do you have to use. Okay, so generally when with regards to washing the hands for bread, you need to use a vessel, a kli, that is able to contain water. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a certain material. It could be wood, glass, stone, dried earth, metal, whatever. All of these materials are allowed, and therefore any of these would be considered a proper kli to use. If someone took a large sponge and soaked it, thinking of all these great things to do, right? And soaked it and then squeezed it out over his hands, this would not be considered a proper Netillat Yadayim, because a sponge is not considered a kli, it's not considered a vessel, it's not considered as it's holding liquids. Plastic or cardboards, all of these are fine for Netillat Yadayim. Even if it's discardable, right? If you have a plastic cup, that's good to go. There's not an issue, so I guess the best thing to do is either carry around with you a water bottle or carry around with you a cup. The container should be able to hold, the vessel should be minimally at least a revi'it, should be able to hold at least 81 milliliters or around 3 ounces. That's usually the minimum that's we consider a kli. So if you're going to bring a travel size, make sure it's at least 3 ounces. We talked about last time about also someone asked the question about what about any leaks? What about if it's cracked? Okay, so there's 2 types of cracks that the Gemara talks about. There's a crack that's called motzi mashke, meaning that it leaks outwards, and there's also kones mashke, which means that water comes inward. Okay, so there's 2 types of cracks. One that it brings the liquid from inside outside, and one that is able to draw in, I guess if submerged, water from outside to inside. So technically, it's possible for a container to have a leak that is motzi mashke. It can release the liquid even though it's not kones mashke. So usually on that side we're a little bit more lenient. The halakha is that the container that needs to hold the liquid but it has to hold the liquid, but it has even if it has a leak that is kones mashke, meaning the water comes in, at that point it's no longer considered a kli, right? So if it's able to if you submerge it in water and you start seeing water come in, that crack is considered too large, and that is no longer considered a vessel for Netillat Yadayim. Even if the hole is above the point of the container that holds the revi'it, at that point, and it's possible for, let's say the hole is closer to the top of the vessel, right? And you're saying that nothing will leak out at all. So the container is still disqualified if it brings in water. So we'll see that if it's the opposite case, though, if it's motzi mashke, right, it is still considered a whole kli as long. So in the opposite case, where if you put water in and it starts to drip out, so we're going to say that is still considered, and it doesn't bring in water. So if you submerge it, water does not come in, right? It only leaks out water. We're going to say that is still considered a kli as long as what? As long as wherever it is leaking from is above a point in the vessel where it can hold a revi'it, where it can hold that 81 milliliters, 3 ounces. At that point, you're allowed to use that vessel for Netillat Yadayim. So the whole point is that we have to make sure that the cracks in the container, in the vessel, are able to there are crack that's motzi mashke. It lets out water, but it does not bring in water, and it has to be above a point where there would be able to hold 81 milliliters. So we just need to make sure that we're doing that. If there is no other container, and he only has one of these cracked containers that is that's motzi mashke, there are some sages that say that one should not recite a blessing with it. Instead, one should think the name of Hashem. Although other poskim rule that there is no difference between them, and so therefore we should be strict. Nonetheless, we hold that you can go ahead and use you can use this vessel. Just because we do have this opinion of Safek Brachot Lakel, we should be worried for this opinion, and you should not go ahead and recite the blessing with such a vessel. So again, if it is kones mashke, meaning if you submerge it and water comes in, at that point, no good. Okay. If you're able to, it doesn't bring in water, but water comes out, at that point, you're in a gray zone. Better to go get a different vessel. If there's no other vessel, go ahead and use it. But you should not recite Hashem's name out loud. You should think it in your head. So when you're saying the blessing, think Hashem's name rather than say it. This is all with regards to kind of ceramic, metal kind of vessels. But with glass, the halakha is more stringent with glass containers. And once any crack appears on the container, it's not allowed to be used for Netillat Yadayim at all. It's mainly because it's also a safety factor, right? It's no longer safe to pour hot water into it. So even if the crack does not leak at all, we're still worried, and because of the safety factor, and therefore it's disqualified for the mitzvah. So the idea is, and on all of these cases, is you want to make sure that the best container possible is the one used, one that doesn't have any cracks. If the container itself is fine, but let's say the handle is broken, then there's no issue. It's still kosher. Sometimes you'll see these containers that they have a handle, and then sometimes they have one handle. It doesn't matter as long as the container itself is fine. If it has any sharp edges, this is a container, right, that has sharp edges, jagged edges. Then just like we said with the with the glass, it becomes dangerous. So the Pri Megadim said that such a vessel is not fit for the mitzvah at all. So if it has any problems that it can cause danger, harm to someone, we say that it does not. It's been disqualified from the mitzvah. The container itself, the vessel itself, has to have a base so that it can sit on by itself. So if someone was to use like a soup ladle that can't sit by itself, it falls down as you try to put it on the table, that would not be able to use. Also, if you have in Israel they have these bags, kind of like that hold. So I think they start selling water bags. You can buy a water in a bag now and drink it like that. So there's a whole halachic debate on that, and so they say that the best case would not be used that, since the bag cannot stand by itself. The Or Letzion ruled that it's disqualified for the mitzvah and it should not be used for that purpose. So basically, any vessel that can stand by itself is good. That's kind of like the bottom line here. The last part, at least to this halakhot, is that the water itself needs to be poured by human force. So that means you can't use, for example, a faucet, because the first kind of water that's going to come out is human force, but the rest of the water is not human force. So even though we say that a faucet is also not a vessel, we said, for example, on a plane, right? So on a plane, what should you do? Or, for example, let's say you're in, sometimes they have these big water coolers, and they do Netillat Yadayim there. So if you don't have a vessel, right, you can technically use that big jug to do your Netillat Yadayim. But what do? You would have to turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, because that means that water that's coming out is from your own force, as opposed to if you just left it on and then you put your hands under. Well, that first water is from your own force, but the rest of it is not. So that would be the case over there.
So if it has like a spigot that you push.
Yeah. So you would keep pushing it. Correct. Yeah. Okay. I think we just about covered all of the halakhot with regards to washing of the hands. They died again. So I'll leave it open now for any questions, and then I think B'ezrat Hashem will continue finally with the halakhot of hamotzi. One final thing is that, of course, the water has to be clear. It can't be murky, can't be muddy. Sometimes if the tap water is foggy, you let it settle. If it doesn't settle, it's still kind of foggy, don't use it. That's probably not a good sign. Also, I forgot to say that the water cannot be used. Nowadays, back then they were more conservative with the water, but nowadays less conservative. But for example, if someone washes his vegetables with water, at that point you can't use that water to do Netillat Yadayim. At that point, it's considered used water. Any used water is not allowed to be used for Netillat Yadayim. Okay, any questions now? Yes.
If you don't have a vessel, but you do have a faucet, do you have to just not do Netillat Yadayim?
So you have to try to find water. If you can find water within a 72 minutes from you, or a vessel within 72 minutes from you, you have an obligation to go ahead and get it. If you don't have any options at all, you don't have any. It's best to at least wash your hands, right? But of course, you would not do it with a blessing.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, one other thing I just saw here is that when you're washing your hands, you should also not use hot water, like burning hot water, right? You should use cold water, and that would be the best. If someone does not have a cup, can one take the faucet? So yeah, on an airplane it's a little different. So airplane is a little different than a regular faucet. A regular faucet in our houses and in most places are connected to the ground and are connected to like these big tanks. So over there we don't classify them as vessels. On an airplane though, it is a big vessel, and so over there you would be able to wash your hands on an airplane. Again, you would have to kind of turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, and also make sure you say the blessing outside of the bathroom. May rose water be used or not? It really depends on how the rose, if you use the rose water kind of like as perfume and you used it as that, then you would not be able to use the rose water. But if it's just kind of sitting there and you haven't used it for anything, then you can go ahead and use it, as long as, of course, as it's not murky or anything. Any other questions? Okay.
I may have missed
Yes.
it, Rabbi,
Mhm.
but Netillat Yadayim, if you have to do it and there's no wash station outside of a bathroom, and you have to do Netillat Yadayim, or not Netillat Yadayim, but Oscar. So to wash your hands, to do Netillat Yadayim, if there's no washing station outside of that bathroom in particular, and you don't have a cup, say it's at a shul.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, are you asking when you come out of the bathroom for that, or for a meal?
Correct. From the bathroom, after coming out of the bathroom.
So after coming out of the bathroom, you don't need a vessel. Okay, well, I guess we'll talk about that later, or not today, but you do not need a vessel for coming out of the bathroom. The vessel is only needed in the morning and for the bread, or for moistened foods. But if you're coming out of the bathroom, technically you don't need a vessel. It's better to use a vessel, but you can, at that point, you can just put it under the faucet 3 times each, and 1, 2, 3, going back and forth, and you're good to go. So bathroom is different with regards to needing of a vessel.
Okay.
Okay. So Bezrat Hashem will continue next week with regards to what happens if you have, for women, do they have to take off their rings? We usually see women take off their rings. Do they have to? What happens if a person has a bandage? What happens, like you guys were mentioning, what happens if there's no water available? Bezrat Hashem will continue, I guess, with the halakhot of Netillat Yadayim next week. And then we'll get into Hamotzi. Okay? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.